Hey guys, so in this video we'll be quickly covering, well, not necessarily quickly, but we'll try to our best to quickly cover Flexbox since it's one of the most important and perhaps to some one of the most confusing topics of CSS. So let's just get started. How do you get started with Flexbox? You basically apply a flex container, a flex display flex property to the container that you want to make a Flexbox. One thing that I do want to point out is I haven't really applied any specific flex properties to any of it. I've just given it a width. I've given it some rounded corners. I've given it a height. I've given it some text color, some background color for you to visualize some of the changes that are going on. So now, let's say if you were to give so by default, as you can see, everything previously was sitting on top of each other. If we give it a flex, if we give the container a flex property, everything is organized into rows. So by default, flex actually tries to organize everything into rows. Everything comes into a single row, and that's just how it works. If you want to again make it or change it into a column, you can do that by saying flex minus column, and that's going to organize the elements into a column. If you want to, let's say, have reverse the order of the column, you want to have box 1 at the bottom, box 3 at the top, you can also do that by saying col minus reverse. And that's going to again reverse the ordering of these elements. Similarly, if you say row minus reverse, it's going to horizontally reverse the ordering. Box 1 is going to sit on the far right and box 3 is going to sit on the left. So let's just again, that's just a basic introduction of rows, columns, and then the reverse property on flex direction. So now let's just go and talk about some of the other ones. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the width of these boxes to 1/2. That's going to be basically width 50%, as you can see here. So even though I just did that, as you can see, some of the elements aren't really taking like 50% width. They're probably taking something along like 33.3333%. They're just equally distributed into portions of 3 or 1/3. So the reason for that is by default, it doesn't matter how many items you have inside of a Flexbox. So I can actually, let's say, make these items 9. And as you can see, if even though I've made them 9 and the width of each element is half 50%, it's necessarily not going to respect that because by default, it tries to have all of the elements sit on a single row. But let's say if you want to change that behavior and if you want to say, hey, I don't really want you force these elements into the width or anything or any funky stuff that you're doing about with them. I just want them to have whatever space they have. And let's say if they don't have enough space, then I just want to move the next item to actually the second row. So if you want to do something like that, you can just say flex minus wrap, and it's going to start wrapping these elements, and it's going to let these elements that are sitting inside of the Flexbox to take the original width that they have. Similarly, you can do a flex minus wrap minus reverse, and similar to some of the column reverse and the row reverse, it's just going to reverse the ordering. Instead of box 3 going into a row that at the bottom, it's going to go into a row that sits at the top. So it's just going to wrap upwards instead of downwards. So that's one important thing to know about. Again, with flex wrap, I'm just going to remove it now. And I'm also just going to change the width of these elements back to, let's say, 1/5 instead of, let's say, 1/2 or 1/3. So now we have these boxes. Let's talk about alignment, since that's like something that mostly gets used when we're referencing or looking at these elements. So if you want to align these items horizontally, we have to mess around with a property named justify content. And in Tailwind, you can just say justify, and you have all of these properties that you can play around with. So let's say if I want to make all of these items sit at the center, I can say justify center. They're going to sit at the center. If I say justify end, they're going to sit at the end. Similarly, if I want to give equal spacing at the edges and in the middle of these elements, I can say justify evenly. And as you can see, the spacing here, the spacing here, the spacing here, and the spacing here is sorted out evenly. And if I want to, there's another property that actually gives some spacing on the left and the right and in the middle, and that's like the around property. But what it does is it actually gives like twice the spacing in the middle of the elements and half of the twice. So basically, for example, this is one call and these are 2 columns. So for example, this is 10, so this is going to be 20, 20, and then 10. It's just going to have that spacing in that sort of a way. We don't usually use around that much since it doesn't really even give that spacing evenly. We probably use evenly, but even then we don't use it. One thing that we do use is we use justify between. So what justify between does is it actually removes all of the spacing on the left and the right. And if you do want to give some spacing, what you basically do is you say, okay, I want to give, let's say, a spacing of 40 pixels on the left and the right, and you can just give that with padding. But what justify between does, it actually takes all of the elements and gives the maximum amount of spacing that it can in between those elements. And that's what we use to, let's say, position some of the header elements. So for example, you have a navigation on the left and you have some items on the right. So you're going to make the container a display flex, and you're going to say justify between to move all of the items on the left to the left and move all of the items on the right to the right. So that's one thing that you do here. Some of the other properties that I want to talk about are, let's just remove this justify between, or perhaps let's just even keep them. Let's just even keep it. So that's one way of actually organizing or the alignment in terms of the horizontal layout. Now, if let's say I want to change the vertical alignment of these items, I can say align items minus center, and you can do that by items minus center, and I say items minus start. Nothing's going to happen because obviously by default it's sitting at the top. If I want to move them vertically to the end, I can say items minus end. If I want to move them to the center, I can say items minus center. If I want to, let's say, stretch all of these items completely, I can say items minus stretch, but this is not going to work. So if I, let's say, refresh, it's not going to work because obviously I have a specific height applied to it. But let's say if I remove the height of one of the elements, as you can see, items that do not have height will stretch to occupy the maximum spacing that they can. Similarly, we have another property that is the baseline property. And what the baseline property does is, let me just change, let me just remove this padding from the top just to explain this particular concept. So as you can see, currently we have these three boxes. They're vertically at the very least aligned or sitting in the same position. All of these boxes are sitting in the same position. But let's say if I want to say I want to align the text that's sitting inside of these boxes and just want to make them sit in a single line. So currently, obviously, as you can see, box 1 and box 3 have the text sitting at the same level. Box 2 has it sitting above. But let's say if I say items minus baseline or align items minus baseline, what's that's going to do is actually going to organize these items in a way so that the text inside of it actually sits vertically aligned. So that's just something that to know about. We don't really use items minus baseline that much, but it's really good to know if you do have a chance of using it. So that's that. Now, coming to similar to what we did with justify content, there's also a property called align content. So what you can do with align content is, let's say you have, I'm just going to add one more item here as well, 1/5. And let's just change the width of these elements to say 1/3. So now we have these 4 items. I'm just going to change the color of this particular one. I'm also going to give the padding back to have the text sit at the center. And I'm just going to remove this justify between, and I'm going to say flex minus wrap so that I can see the 4th box wrapping. So now, if I, let's say, want to move all of these items to the bottom, I want all of these items to stick to the bottom, what can I do? Well, as we've talked about, we can vertically align items to the bottom by saying items minus n. But let's say if we do that, we can see that there's still some spacing between them. It's not, all of the items aren't really aligning to the bottom. So the thing is that if you want to do it, since you're not saying that align all of these, what you're basically saying is you want to align all of the content that's inside of my container to the end. You're going to say content minus end. So what content minus end does is it aligns the content to the end, and now it's going to be to the end. Similarly, I can say content minus center, and it's going to align the content to the center. I can say content minus space between. Between, it's going to give equal spacing between, and then not equal spacing is just going to give the maximum spacing between. And I can similarly say content minus around, and it's going to give that some of the spacing around and some of the spacing in the middle. So that's one thing that you want to know about. And let's just remove this. Let's just go back to wherever we were. And I think like those are some of the major properties that you want to know about. If you want to, let's say, then obviously play around, you want to say, hey, I want to have, and I'm just going to change the width of these, or I can probably just remove, or let's just go ahead and change the width of these elements and say this is going to be 1 over 4. So now obviously all of these elements, even though a flex wrap is applied, all of these elements are just going to sit in a single row. And I can also comment out this particular item, and I can say if I want to, let's say, position all of these items vertically centered and horizontally centered as well, I can say justify minus center and then items minus center, and that's going to just make all of these items center. So you can obviously play around with the positioning. You can make it bottom center, left center, however you want to work around with it. That's perfectly fine, and you have the flexibility of doing that. So now coming to some of the properties that you can apply on the children. So let's see, I want to apply a property. So there's a property that you can apply on the elements to change their ordering. So for example, I want to say, hey, all of this looks good, but for some weird reason, I want to have this box 2 become the first box on the left, let's say. So what I'm going to say is the order of, let's say, box 1 is going to be, I don't know, 2. Order for box 1 is going to be 2, and order for box 1 is, order for box 1 is going to be 2, and order for box 2 is going to be 1. So I'm just going to change the ordering of this box, and as you can see, let me just remove the flex wrap and just save it. So now as you can see, box 3 goes to the first element, to the first one. Well, because we don't have any ordering applied to it, so an element that does not have any ordering applied to it basically just takes the first position that's available to it. But let's say I'm going to say, hey, you're still going to be 3. You don't get to choose the first position. And once I do that, box 2 is going to be the first element. And similarly, I can say I can align these items, or I can arrange the ordering of this content in any particular way that I want. I can say box 1 is going to be the last one, and box 3 is going to be the first one, or something along those lines, and that's going to work as well. And you can just play around with any sort of ordering. We don't usually change ordering by Flexbox. In most cases, ideally, you want to structure your own HTML in a particular order, but in scenarios where that isn't possible, or perhaps you're working with a responsive scenario where you want to change the ordering based on the screen size. So on mobile, you want to have a particular ordering, and on desktop, we want to have a different ordering. Then you have that flexibility of using Flexbox to do that, instead of having different HTML written for both of those screen sizes. So that's a really cool thing to know about. Similarly, for example, if you want to talk about if you want to, let's say something like, hey, box 1, I want to give box 1 a particular width. So the width of box 1 is going to be, let's say, 1 over 6. Width of box 3 is also going to be 1 over 6. So these are really small boxes, but for some weird reason, obviously it's not a weird reason. Imagine you have a header element, you have your logo sitting on the left, you have your, let's say, user avatar and the hamburger menu sitting on the right, but you have a really long search bar in the middle, and you want the search bar to occupy as much width as it can. What you can do is you can say, instead of giving it a specific width, you're going to say, I want it to take flex 1. But what flex 1 does is it actually expands the element to take the maximum amount of width available. Or if, let's say, the direction of this particular Flexbox was flex minus column, it's going to do the same thing vertically. Vertically, box 2 is going to occupy the maximum amount of height that it can. So those are some of the cool things that you can do with Flex 1. It's really one of the most important features of Flexbox, allowing you to actually have flexible widths and stuff. So that's really great. One other thing that you can do is you can change the alignment of these elements against what the larger container dictates their alignment to be. So everything, as you know, is being aligned centrally from a vertical and a horizontal perspective. So let me just change this width as well. So let's say I'm going to change the width to be again 1 over 6. So all of the boxes are the same width. And now let's say if I want to change the alignment of this particular box, I can say self, and then I can say self minus start. And as you can see, even though all of the items are centered horizontally, I can say align minus self, and then I can say it's going to be sitting at the start, and I'm just going to change the alignment of this box, overriding the alignment property that's sitting at the top. And similarly, you can do it self minus end, or you can do whatever it is that you want with it. So one more important thing that I'd like to point out is let's just go revert all of these things. I'm going to remove justify items, and then, sorry, align items, and then justify content center. And I'm just going to have it like it was before. And just to reiterate what I said before, if you want to horizontally align items, you can say justify minus center. That's going to horizontally center them. If you want to vertically align items to the center, you can say items minus center, and that's going to vertically center them. However, just a minor caveat here, if you actually change the flex direction to a column, now as you can see, the items are arranged in columns, in rows, and it's a particular, like the container is sitting in a column. So now if you go ahead and if you do something like that, and if you want to vertically align these elements, you are no longer going to say items minus center. Items minus center is now going to work to horizontally center these elements. Now let's say if I save, as you can see, the interaction between items minus center and justify minus center, and let's say items or content minus center, so on and so forth, that has been reversed. So now if I want to, let's say, change the horizontal centering of the element, I have to say items minus center. If I want to say, if I want to change the vertical alignment of the element, I would have to say justify minus center. So that's like one major thing that you have to know about, like when you actually change flex direction, that's going to impact how align items or justify content or align content's going to work. So just something to keep an eye out when you're working with it. But apart from that, I think we're done. We've really covered a lot of things here, and this should be really beneficial for you to get started with Flexbox. We're going to use primarily these properties to create our layouts. I don't think we're going to need any other property in the Flexbox paradigm when we're working with it. We may need them, but we may get to that when we're actually working on creating our dribble assignment. That's going to be a much more visual representation of dribble. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, or if you want to know about a specific property that we haven't encountered yet, or you want me to talk about that more, create a video on it, then definitely do let me know. But I'll see you in the next video.